Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Jackie, and today we're looking at steps 1 and 2 of the VAT return. So that's preparing the VAT return and getting to the point of reconciling your VAT return. This is part of a series, so we do have step 3 tomorrow morning at 11 and also a session on running reports on Thursday at 11 as well. So we will show you how you can register for those sessions. So all three of those together will give you enough information to get through your VAT return. So a bit of housekeeping first of all, you have been placed on mute. That just means that you can't speak to the team today. However, if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to send them across to us through the questions panel. So you can use the icon that looks like a speech bubble with the question mark in the middle, and that will open up the questions panel for you to type your questions across to us. We've got Matt and Michael in the background, ready and waiting for your questions. So don't feel you need to wait till the end of the session. Please do get them submitted throughout. There's also a copy of today's slides, so you can download the slides for today's session using the icon that looks like the document with the folded corner. After today, there will be a link in your follow-up email today to register for upcoming webinars, but also to watch recordings. So if you do want to watch this session again, you can do so. Okay, so this is what we're going to be covering today. Now, this used to be a single session, okay? What we've done is we've split it up because we were finding it was taking quite some time to get through. So we've tried to sort of break it into bite-sized chunks for you. So in this session today, we're going to just do a quick introduction into the VAT return, and then we're going to do a demonstration of step 1 and step 2. But along the way, what we'll try and do is pick up some of the key questions we get through to technical support. And at the end, we'll show you where you can find further support on your VAT return, and we'll follow up on any questions we can. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a poll first of all, and just want to find out what return you're generating. Okay, so we might have some of you joining us from Ireland. The majority are probably from the UK, but we just like to gauge who it is that's joining us today. So you should see a poll appearing on your screen in just a moment. And just going to have a quick look to see if that poll's out. It is indeed. So if you can, just pop a vote across. Just so we know if we do have anyone from Ireland, we're covering from both sides, or at least highlighting where there may be some subtle differences in the VAT return. And so far, we've got a small group of you doing both, but as suspected, 90% of you are doing a UK return. So I'm going to close that and just share that very quickly, so that you can see there the reasoning why today's demonstration data is a UK data set. Like I say, the principle of today is very much the same in the Republic of Ireland. It's just some of the screens might be slightly different, and obviously you've got some different boxes to report on, but everything we're going to cover is applicable to both UK and Ireland. If not, we will highlight those differences for you. Okay, thank you very much. And a quick question there, is this the same webinar that was run on the 21st of October? So most probably so. We do run these on a regular basis, okay? Because we have new customers joining us all the time, new people introduced to webinars. So if it was VAT return part 1, it will be the same as the 21st of October. Yes, it will be a repeat session. So some sessions we don't do as often, but VAT is definitely a topic we do on a monthly basis to try and help as many of our customers as possible there. Okay, so first of all, just looking at the VAT return, I'm just going to highlight some of the subtle differences there between the UK and Ireland. You have a VAT ledger, and that is the same in both UK and Ireland, but your options along the top of the VAT window are slightly different depending on where you are based. So in the UK, you've got the VAT return, but you have things like scale charges, EC sales, and EU reverse charge, all of which we've got sessions on or are no longer in use in terms of the EC sales. In Ireland, it's slightly different. You have the VAT return, but you also have the VES return and the RTD options at the top, which is slightly different reporting because of different legislation in Ireland. Again, with the UK and the Irish return, there is differences in the boxes that will appear, but most of what we're going to cover today, which is on the left-hand side of the window, is exactly the same. Okay, but once you calculate, it will calculate different in the UK to Ireland. So in the UK, we have 9 boxes labelled 1 to 9, and in Ireland we have 11 boxes, some of which don't have labels on them, and the labelling is slightly different. Okay, so I'm going to actually do this on a demonstration for you. Okay, these slides here are just to highlight some of the differences between the UK and Ireland there. So I'm going to actually jump into a demonstration, bring my data set across, and this is me in my VAT ledger. So I've gone into VAT on the left hand side, and that has taken me into my ledger, and that shows me my history of all of my VAT and VAT related returns. So if you've done EC sales in the past, you will find your EC sales list sit in this list. And also in Ireland, if you've done things like a VAT's return or an RTD, they will also sit in this window. But today we're focusing purely on VAT returns, so you can see I've only got my VAT returns here. As you can see, I've got my historic returns showing in here. I can see my most recent return at the bottom there, and you can see at the moment I'm doing a quarterly return. Now the software can deal with any period that you specify. You would just specify your date range in there. What I can do from here is I can open up that previous return. So I can't really make any amendments to it, but I can review those features or those figures, and I can use things like the drill down option to look at those figures in more depth. So it's kind of like a history of all of my VAT returns, and it allows me to access those. So that is a completed VAT return. It's marked as reconciled. It's just waiting for step 3, which we'll cover tomorrow. So we're actually going to do our next VAT return. And as you'll notice from my data set, the next VAT return for this data set is actually from October to the end of December. So we're going to do some assumptions today that we've reached the end of December. We're actually doing our December VAT return. So one of the key questions we get, it's a very simple one, but it's very easily done, is how do I get into a new VAT return? Okay, if I go to new VAT return here, VAT return, at the moment, it's actually picking up the previous return. So the key thing, and I will say this is key because we have a lot of calls on it, is just to make sure if you're trying to do a blank return that you don't have anything highlighted. Very simple fix, but very easily done. So at the moment, I don't have anything highlighted, and then when I go into VAT return, I now have a blank VAT return. So that takes us into the return ready for us to start. So like I mentioned earlier, we are going to just cover step 1 and step 2 in this session to make sure that we can cover that in as much detail as possible and get as many of your questions answered. So tomorrow we'll pick up with step 3, which is completing the return. So the first thing you need to do in this window is to take a backup. Okay, you don't necessarily have to have taken the backup from here. You could have done a file backup prior to this. As long as you've got a backup, it doesn't matter how you've taken that. Okay, the reason you need to take a backup is we do not have an undo option on a VAT return. Okay, it would be great if we could say unreconcile and do all of the work for us, but unfortunately we can't do that. So we do need to have a backup so that if we accidentally do reconcile this return and we haven't yet submitted to HMRC, we can undo that reconciliation process. So reconciling is the process of setting this VAT return in stone and completing that VAT return. So we just need to make sure we've always got a point of return. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the date range. Now this might be quite self-explanatory for some, but there are some options here that do cause a lot of questions again, particularly for those maybe new to VAT and processing VAT returns. So at the moment, it's recognising that my VAT return should start in October, but again, it's also recognising it should end at the end of October, which is incorrect in this data set because it is a quarterly return. So the first thing I'm going to do is just change that to the end of December. So always cross-check yourself there and just double check that that is the correct period for you there. Now, we do have the option up here for using a custom date range. Okay, so in here, if I change this by clicking on here, this is where rather than selecting whole months, we can actually specify a date range. Now, what I will say is 9 times out of 10, you don't need to use this feature, but you might want to run this because you're maybe trying to just have a look at the figures for a given period, and it might not be that it's full months. So you might have, for example, you might want to see what your liability is up to today's date, for example. So I might want to see from the beginning of October up to today's date, which is the 26th. And I might want to calculate the return, but not reconcile it, just so I can see where I am. So that's one reason you might want to use a date range on there. The other reason you might want to use that, now I'm going back 5 years now, but it was a problem 5 years ago, was to do with leap years. Okay, now it didn't happen this year, but the previous time we had leap year, it didn't recognize the 29th of February. So what we had to do is we had to revert to using the date range and just make sure we popped the 29th of February in there. So those are just some examples of when you might use that, but I would say the majority of the time you're going to be using the whole month option and making sure that you're covering your full period, whether that's a month, whether it's quarterly, or whether it's annually. Now the next one we've got here is a tick box to include reconciled transactions. And again, we get lots of questions, particularly from those who are new, asking what's this box? Why is it there? Should I tick it? Should I not? So if you think about it, we're doing a return for October to December now. Looking at my previous period, this has never been reconciled before. Okay, so if I tick that box to include reconciled transactions, it's going to include any transactions that were reconciled between October and December. Now really, because I haven't done one before, it won't make any difference because there isn't any previously reconciled transactions to pull through. So normally, again, we would say leave this unticked because really there shouldn't be anything reconciled. You should just be doing one return per period. Where this does get used is where things have gone wrong. Okay, so it tends to be something our technical support teams might use, or you may use yourself if you're comfortable to do so, where someone has maybe reconciled in error. Okay, so for example, you've maybe reconciled already for October to December. It didn't include all of your transactions for October to December, so you're reprocessing the VAT return. You would want to include reconciled transactions. There is problems with that. It's not a perfect fix because what happens is when you do a VAT return for October to December, it always looks back to previous periods, okay, to see if there's anything unreconciled that should be. But that doesn't work when you have to use this option, okay? So the best option is always to revert back to the backup that I referred to earlier. So just make sure you have that backup. Don't find yourself in a situation where you need to use this function, but it is there should you need it. Okay, so the next one is verification checks. So these verification checks are set up in the software to check data for accuracy. Okay, it's checking things that look odd, so anomalies in the data. It's certainly not saying those transactions are wrong, but it's just saying these transactions may need just a little bit more attention or checking prior to submitting to HMRC. So here we've got the settings for those checks. And in here, what you can do is you can switch them on or off. Okay, so by default, they will be switched on. You can deselect which ones you want. You can select all and clear the ones you want to clear. My recommendation would always be to leave them on to start with and then gradually switch off the ones that you don't find relevant to your business. And what this will do is it will flag things that are maybe not in line with other transactions, things that it thinks are odd for your data set, for you to check. It doesn't mean you have to do anything to them. If you're happy with the reason that they're sort of being flagged up, you can leave them. It's just flagging them just to double check. Now, this is where we do find a difference in the UK and Ireland. The only ones that are different are these two here. So what you'll find in Ireland is your sort of thresholds for errors are slightly different because of the standard rate in Ireland, which is normally 23%. Also, T1 in Ireland is 23% rather than 20%. So you'll find those are slightly different, but all of the rest of them are the same for both UK and Ireland. Just to give you some examples here, just to try and put these into context for you as to when it might be doing the right thing for you or you might want to switch them off. The first one there is to identify possible duplicate transactions. So this can depend on your business type. So if you are a business that has lots of transactions and they all vary very different from one another, you may want to switch this on to identify potential duplicates to make sure you haven't put through a transaction twice. However, you may be a different business model that maybe works on more of a subscription basis, and you do have lots of transactions that are quite similar. And what you might find is that this starts to flag up every single transaction you post. So in that case, you might want to switch this off because this might not be as relevant to you. We also have things like identify purchase orders. Now, if you're not using the purchase order module, you might want to switch that particular one off. One down here, which causes quite a lot of messages, and I'll indicate why in just a moment, is this one here around identifying sales and purchase transactions not using your most common tax code. So first of all, it's asking you for one most common tax code. So most of the time, that would be a T1. Okay, but that means the minute you process any transaction using any other tax code, they will flag up for you. Okay, so it's probably a good idea because it will flag up anything just to check, have you posted on the right tax code? But what you might want to consider is my most common tax code in fact a T1? Okay, if you work with a lot of zero rated goods, it might be that actually T0 is your most common tax code and you might want to change that over. But quite a lot of the time, this flags up a lot of transactions for you because it's very rare a business will just use a T1 tax code because there are lots of zero rated items and services going around, as well as exempt ones using T2 as well. Okay, so that is your verification checks. Now, the reason people might want to switch these off is it does add time onto the VAT return because it needs to do those checks for you. But like I say, it's advisable to leave them on initially, and then you can start to switch them off as you start to recognize which ones are relevant to your business and to your processing. So for the purposes of today, I am going to leave them all on. I won't have messages on both of them, but I am going to leave them all on today. So I'm going to click on OK, and that brings us to the end of step 1, which is preparing for the VAT return. When I click calculate, don't worry, I still have the option to come out of the return. So calculate isn't going to sort of finalize anything for me. This may take a while depending on your data set. I'm going to click on calculate return. You can see we get the scroll bar. And then what we have before we move on to step 2 is an earlier unreconciled transactions window. So earlier I mentioned, when we click calculate, it looks at all of your transactions in the date range you've specified. So for me, the 1st of October to the end of December, but it also then looks back in time, back prior to October, for any VAT transactions that have not been reconciled. And there are 2 genuine reasons why you would have a transaction in here. What you hopefully won't be seeing is loads and loads and loads of transactions going back years. That normally indicates something has maybe not been reconciled in the past, and you may need to sort of try and get to the bottom of that, because we really need to use this window to pull through our late entries and our corrections. So those are the two genuine reasons you should have a transaction in this window. And strangely enough, I've got an example of each of them on. So let's have a look first of all at the first one here. So this is a sales invoice. And if I highlight it there, this is a sales invoice that has been added as a late entry. Okay, so we closed off October in terms of the VAT return, and for some reason we have an invoice that has been posted at the end of September. Now that could be an error. So at this point we need to identify, is that an error? Do I need to go and change the date on that? Should it be an October date? Or is it just that we did enter it late and we need to include it on this return? So if you did need to correct it, you'd need to take a note of the transaction number, close out the return, make the correction, and then recalculate your VAT return. Now we're going to assume in this case it's a genuine late entry, so that invoice was actually sent out after we completed the return, so we do need to include that in the October to December return to report that to HMRC or revenue in the case of Ireland. The next one, there's a clue in the details column. So this is actually a corrected transaction. Okay, so the other thing that should be pulling through is any corrections. So this particular transaction here is actually a correction for an invoice which was originally posted on transaction 811. So the invoice was posted, it was included on the VAT return at the end of October, but we subsequently deleted that invoice. But rather than delete, you can't delete a VAT reconcile transaction. So what it has had to do is it's had to reverse it by posting a credit note. So I do in fact need to include that in the next return. Now my options to include or ignore are all or nothing. Okay, so I can't include one and ignore the other. Okay, I need to get myself to a point here where I can include them or just ignore all. The problem with ignoring them all is that they will just come back next time, okay? Unless we deal with them next time we do our return in January to March, we will have them there again. So they're just going to sit there and they're just going to start to accumulate. Okay, so really we want to get to a point where we can clear them out of this window. So if they're here incorrectly, what can you do to remove it from that window? Is it that you've posted on the wrong date? Does the transaction need to be deleted from the software? Is there something we need to do there? So we've identified we have a late entry and we have a correction, and they do need to be included. So in this case, I am going to include those on the return. And that takes us on to step 2. So step 2 is where it shows us our calculated figures. Okay, so we've got our calculated figures here. And again, in Ireland, you'll have slightly different boxes, but you will have the drill down feature on most of those boxes. So this drill down option here, if I click on this icon here, takes me into the breakdown of what tax codes and what transaction types are used to calculate that box. And it also allows me to go even further. So if I wanted to see my sales invoices on a T1, it allows me to drill down right down to the transactional level. So I can see on my tiny data set, just 3 transactions, but you will probably have a lot more. But it's great because you can also send this to Excel so you can have a deeper look. So those are the drill down features. They're available on most boxes. The ones that are grayed out are calculation boxes. So they're actually based on calculations from other boxes. So that's why they're grayed out. Now, what we also have across here is the option to print reports. So you are wanting to use the drill down, you can use that to check your figures, but there are a set of reports. Now, we aren't going to go into detail on those today because that's what we're going to cover in session 3 on Thursday at 11. In that session, we'll show you what reports you should be running and what you should be comparing against each report, and also ways to reconcile differences. And it's a bit more of a sort of hands-on session. We get you involved in that session a little bit more. So if you want to join that session on checking your figures and making sure everything's posted correctly, then please do join us on that session, and we'll go into this a little bit more. So a whole 45-minute session dedicated to this area here. So I'm just going to pick up from up here of viewing the results of those verification checks. And in here, we've got a couple of things that's highlighted. And what we can do is we can view from here. So with these verification checks, it's not indicating they're wrong. It's just saying you might want to check what's happened with these ones. So in this particular one, we have got 5 invoices or credits in my invoices and credits module, which is the one here, which are sitting in that ledger, but they're not yet updated. So we haven't clicked update ledgers, which means although the invoice is on the invoices and credits module, it's not yet impacting my customer. It's not yet impacting the VAT return. It's not impacting my nominal code. So it's not really a transaction yet. So if these are genuine invoices, you'll need to investigate why they haven't been updated. Is it a duplicate that's maybe not been posted because another one has been posted? Or is it that you've maybe not committed to using that module yet, but you've had a quick go and you've just left the invoices on there? So there could be a valid reason why that is. But if these are meant to be live transactions, these need to be updated before you continue. If you need to do that, you need to come out of the VAT return, go and update them to the ledgers, and then start the VAT return process again. Excuse me. So in this case, we're just going to assume that these have been sort of trial runs of the module. We haven't yet committed to using the module, so in fact they're not live transactions just yet. The same with purchase orders here. So I also have a purchase order here that's been delivered. So I have received the goods, but haven't been invoiced. Okay, so again, we just need to investigate that. Is there a reason why? So in this case here, it's from 2021, so it's going back a bit. So is there a reason for that? Have they not invoiced me? If they haven't invoiced me, I'll need to chase the invoice. Or again, could it be we've had a little play around with the purchase order module and actually it's not a live transaction, it ultimately needs deleted from the software. So we're going to assume that in this case again, just to try and keep things smoothly. So we're just going to ignore those, and we know that these items in these two are not going to be included on the return. So you can view, but again, you don't need to take action. If you think that transaction is correct, that's absolutely fine. You can leave them as they are. It's just saying, just check this one before you continue. Okay, so the next one we've got is the option to make adjustments. Okay, now this is probably not as commonly used. What it shouldn't be used for is corrections. Okay, so if you've missed off a transaction and you're just thinking, I'll just alter the VAT return for that, that's not the way to go about that. Okay, if you've missed off a transaction, you've realized right here at this point, come out of the return, enter the transaction, and then recalculate. That's the best course of action. Adjustments tend to be used if your accountant has indicated you need to. If you've got a letter from HMRC or ROS to indicate you need to increase or decrease a box on the next return, or because you're on a specialist VAT scheme that requires adjustments. So a really good example of that in the UK, which is our most common one, is partial exemption. So partial exemption requires calculations to take place outside of the software and adjustments to be made to the VAT return. So that's where you would use an adjustment to do that. So I'm just going to go into make adjustments just to show you how that works. Say, for example, we've got a letter from HMRC to say adjust box 1 on the next return. We can go into the edit icon and we can pop in a reason. So it might just be HMRC advice. We can tab across and I can pop in the value. I can also pop in a negative value just using the negative figure and take that one out, and we'll just do a plus on this one and we just save. And you can see there what it's done is it's shown me what was originally calculated, what the adjustment is, and then what the new reported figure is based on that adjustment. So now when I close down out of this window, my box 1 has that new inflated figure as a result of that adjustment. Now what you can do is if you've got an attachment, so if you've got that letter from HMRC or you've got that large calculation on a spreadsheet, what you can do is add that in here so that, you know, if you get audited in 5 years' time, I can't remember last week, never mind 5 years' time, it just means you've got it to hand what that adjustment was. So it's going to make it much easier for audit purposes or somebody else picking up the role after you maybe move on. So you can browse a document in and attach that to the VAT return. Now that can be added at a later point, so don't worry if you don't have that attachment available there, you can add that at a later point. So that takes us to the last step here, which is to reconcile the return. So you only use this option once you are 100% happy with the figures on the return. Okay, so once you've done all your reconciliation reports, you've checked each box, you're happy everything's been posted, at that point you reconcile the return. Now, not only does that reconcile the return, it will post an adjustment journal for your adjustments. So that's why we always say if you've got a correction to do, then the correction needs to be done correctly because this will post a journal for you. Okay, so I'm going to click on reconcile. And that is now just telling me made an adjustment, but you haven't attached any documents. Do you want to do this now? So I'm going to say no, because again, like I said, you can add this later because you might not have it to hand. And flag transactions as VAT reconciled, so you can't reverse the VAT return process. So that's what I mentioned earlier on. And do I wish to continue? I'm going to just say yes to that. So that takes us to step 3. So that's where we are going to pick up from tomorrow. So I'm not going to go any further on that one. But what I do want to show you there is on transactions. So on transactions there, it's posted the journal. And it's posted the journal between my VAT liability, which in my case is 2207. It's normally 2202. But on different data sets it might be slightly different, but by default it would be 2202 and also 2204, which is your manual adjustments nominal code. If you want to check what yours are, you can go into settings and control accounts and you can check yours in here. It's just a bit further down, so you can see my VAT liability is 2207 and manual adjustments is 2204. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the demonstration there. I'm just going to quickly pop back to the slides there. So that takes us through the slides. Okay, so a quick question there is, I assume pre-registration expenses would go through the adjustment option as well. So pre-registration expenses, I'm assuming this is pre-registering for VAT. Again, they may still be processed as normal transactions that would be picked up on the VAT return. So that's probably one just to double check with your accountant on how to process those particular transactions. Because it might be that you put those through as normal transactions and they'll be picked up by the VAT return if applicable, because again, if they're expenses, not all of them may be VAT-able at that point. Okay, so just want to show you where you can find more help and support based on VAT. So if you go to sage.co.uk/help, that will take you to our help centre. Within the help centre, you've got the option to manage your VAT, and from there, it will ask you if you're in the UK or Ireland, and it will give you guidance based on where you are located. In there, it's got everything. It's got information on legislation, how to process transactions, help with VAT, common questions. So there was someone mentioning earlier on that they were very new to VAT. That's probably a really good port of call in terms of processing. Also, the links in the handout also take you to the relevant help centre based on where you are located. So now's a great opportunity to get your questions across just before I go into the upcoming webinars. So again, we've still got Matt and Michael here. So please do keep your questions coming over and we'll try and get as many answered as possible. But remember, we'll go into part 3 tomorrow and also on, part 3 of the VAT return tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we'll be looking at the reports. So if you want a bit more information on reports, you can join us on that session. Okay, while final questions are coming across, I'm going to just show you our login page for webinars. So if you go to sage.co.uk/webinars and select the option for Accounts Live, which I'll just bring across so you can see that. Got the live option here. This is all the upcoming live webinars. There was a request earlier about seeing previous recordings. They are also available on here. So if we've done the webinar, the recording will be here. But if you look at our live sessions, this shows you what's coming up. So this afternoon, we're continuing our correction sessions. We've got correcting invoices and orders, and that's continuing into next week as well. However, this afternoon, we're looking at this week we're looking at correcting stock. We're also looking at part 2, completing and submitting your return as well. But we've also got our festive series coming up in December. So this covers sort of routines and tasks that you'll probably only do annually as part of that year-end process. So things like you might be running a year-end, but also things like adding messages onto invoices and statements, and global changes and batch changes. So maybe that time of year where you need to sort of make a mass change across your data, could be price increases, decreases. So there's lots of ways in which you can use the global changes and batch changes features to help you do those tasks across multiple records. Okay, so there's a few questions coming across. Just going to see what I can do to jump on and see if I can help out with any of these. But please do keep them coming. We might just pop on mute for a moment while we see if we can get to the bottom of these questions for you. So I'll just leave you with the questions screen on there while we go through those questions. We will be back before we end the session, but if you are leaving us in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you on another session soon. Okay, a quick question came through here, just saying I reconciled the VAT return a while ago, and these still show up on unreconciled transactions. How can I get rid of them? Did a correction at the time and sent it to HMRC. So the only way you can get rid of transactions is going to be to go down the line of doing what we call a dummy return. And what that means is sort of essentially doing a return up to a certain date to mark them as reconciled so that they don't get picked up on future VAT returns. So I would say be very careful with it. Just make sure that you are only picking up those that were included at the time. But you might just need to run the return up to the point I have done today and then not submit that to HMRC. That's the only way we can get rid of them, is to essentially reconcile them in the software. So I think that ties in nicely to another question that's come through there around sort of having an issue a few years ago where you've got lots of transactions that relate to these arrears. They keep coming up as unreconciled and they keep ignoring them. How do I handle this? So this is where we need to be really careful. But again, you probably need to do a dummy VAT return up to that point to remove those transactions, because we want to make sure that that previously unreconciled transactions window is just pulling through corrections and late entries. You're going to sort of risk missing those because you've got all of those historic transactions in there. So have a look at them up to the date that you're sort of considering, and you potentially do a dummy return. So popping a date in that reflects all of those older transactions, reconciling them off, but you may need to then revisit all of the late entries and corrections you've got since. So be careful with that. You might want to speak to our team or your accountant just before you do so on there. There's a quick question there, which I think Matt was about to. Matt might give you the link for this, and it's just about, could you please briefly explain tax codes, the defaults T0, T1, T9, and T5 with a couple of examples. We've got some great articles that give examples on all of those for you and examples of when you might use those. So I think Matt's going to get you a couple of those, but we have done a dedicated session on tax codes. So again, our recordings page is probably a good port of call on that for you. There's a great tax code finder in the UK, which I think is the link Matt's provided for you, and it asks you a set of questions. Based on your answers, it will tell you what tax code to use, or if you need more information from HMRC. So there is lots of help in our help centre about those different tax codes. So for example, T1 is your standard rate where you would have your 20% on there. T0 is VATable, but it's zero rated, so it still gets picked up on the VAT return in terms of the net element, but it doesn't have VAT on there. T9 will be completely excluded from the VAT return, and T5 is normally reduced rate. So again, check out those links that Matt has provided for you there. Okay, so again, another one around, we'll have a number of unreconciled transactions in Sage. The only way you can clear transactions from a VAT return is to have them marked as reconciled. So if you are sort of changing VAT status, you might find most of your transactions haven't been VATable and have gone through on a T9, but if you do have lots of unreconciled transactions, the dummy VAT return is will be the only way to clear them out. But again, just seek that advice from your accountant to make sure that you're not including anything that does need to be included on VAT returns going forward. So it's difficult for us to give really specific guidance on the webinars. So I always just make sure that you're careful and you sort of consult your accountant in those situations. Okay, so that takes us pretty much to the end of the session. I don't think there are any outstanding questions from what I can see. Double check there. Nothing outstanding at the moment. So we'll bring the session to an end there. So thank you very much for joining us. Like I say, tomorrow we're back at 11 again. We'll look at part 2, slightly shorter session, so about half an hour. We'll just go through those final steps of the return, which is more about tidying up the VAT return and doing those sort of final finishes on there. So thank you very much for joining us. Take care, and we will hopefully see you on another session really soon. But bye for now.